I'm Matt.
Hey, I'm Steve.
Hey, I'm John.
This is the Sober Friends Podcast. We're here for the sober curious, the new guy, and the old timer. We're here to talk about the stuff anyone looking to live alcohol-free has to face day to day, and how we overcame those struggles. We speak for no 12-step group, but we do try to remain anonymous. You're not alone. This is the Sober Friends Podcast. Steve, the first meeting I ever went to, actually, this is ironic. We're taping on a Sunday night around 6 p.m., and the first meeting I ever went to is on a Sunday night. I think it might be at 6 in East Hartford. It's a quote-unquote beginners meeting near a bunch of sober houses. In that meeting, there were a bunch of people who were chronic relapsers. One guy kept like kind of wandering around the room saying, like kind of almost mumbling to himself, I relapse. And I didn't know what the hell I had gotten involved in going there. First meeting. It's not what I had as an expectation. It makes me think about people who come into meetings who are chronic relapsers. And a thought there is, how do you handle people like that? Are they a detriment to the other people? Or can they be a benefit? And if they're a detriment, what do you do? Initial thoughts on that.
Yeah, good to be with you on this Sunday evening, Matt. Beautiful day up here in the Northeast. I guess if it's chronic, okay, I guess if they're always coming in, it can be very distracting. It can be very distracting to a meeting. And I don't think they're detrimental because we can learn something from everyone.
Yes.
And that includes people who are struggling, maybe more from people who are struggling than people who have long-term sobriety. I mean, it depends on the situation. Because when I look at those people, and I know those people, I mean, I know some people who are chronic relapsers, right? I have some, one in particular, but actually a couple sponsees who I know, I worked with these guys for years. And I know that there, a couple of them at least are still out there and, and drinking, just chronic relapsing. And, I can still go to some of the meetings and see these people's names in the books with several things and crossed out and another one. And I'm talking about within, a year or 8 months time, where it's just a new sobriety date. Now, I give them a lot of credit. They're trying, but at some point, as I like to say, I realized that if I wanted to get sober, I was going to have to stop drinking.
Right. In one of our Joe and Charlie's, we had a guy who has been going to AA meetings for, I think at that point, 20, 25, 30 years and never got more than a year's sobriety in that time.
Yeah.
And he did 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
Right. And it was never big problems. I don't know what it was. Right. I forgot about that. It was never like I went out on these big benders. Like he'd go out and have a couple drinks, literally have a couple drinks just to blow, and
I'm going out on a cruise next week. So I'll be in international waters.
Yeah. So listen, it's a fickle thing. This disease of ours, it is relentless. I don't know. I mean, I realized for myself that, it's a constant, it's a constant, I don't want to say battle because it's not a battle anymore, but it's a constant conscious thought that I need to continue to take care of myself in that manner. Like I need to always be thinking about that. And, so, getting back to the topic, like, so are these, what's the value or what's, how do we handle them? Right. Lots of ways to handle them. Right. Depends on the meeting you go to. Right. Some meetings will just call them out in front of the meeting. Right. Some really tough meetings some of the old timers will just call them out. Other times you're going to get, somebody's going to, which is probably mostly what's going to happen. Somebody's going to take them aside like, hey, you're disrupting the meeting or, hey, you need some help. But it's a hard thing to figure out.
Or this.
I want to fight you.
Yeah, right. But the other thing that we were talking, we were thinking of, like, here's what I think when I see that. If we don't accept those, especially in AA, right? we were talking about another platform that maybe you don't want those people around. But in AA, if we don't accept them, where do they go?
Right.
Where do they go? And I mean, again, by tradition, we have to accept them, but there's a line, right? They can't be disruptive. They can be relapses and come in and sit quietly and suffer through it and say, "Hey, I'm coming back." I mean, we've had enough of those people. One of the things I will say this is I was through once COVID got going and all the meetings around us, most of them shut down. The first meeting I went to was an outdoor meeting on a Saturday at next town over from me, and it was under a pavilion. It was nice to get to a meeting and see people after months of not seeing people in person at a meeting. I would still see some people, but there was a woman there, and even before that, and she was one of these people. She was a chronic relapser, and she would come back in and she would say, "I'm coming back," and she would get up and get her 24-hour coin. And I used to say to her, I give yourself some credit for coming back. Not only that, but standing up and saying that. And I do believe that I heard that she sort of has put together several years of sobriety, 3 or 4 years.
That's phenomenal.
I haven't seen her since I don't go to a lot of meetings in that town, but I have heard that, and I really hope it's true.
I love hearing stories like that it can happen. There's another guy that we know who was kind of a chronic relapser and then would go out for 7 years or whatever. And this was 20, 25 years. Guy I know, he got sober for keeps about 2 years before I did and has stayed sober. He was one of these chronic relapsers for 20 years and has since put together about 15 years of sobriety.
Right.
So it can happen, and sometimes it takes decades. There are so many different ways to get sober now, and there are some of these communities, sometimes associated with podcasts or blogs or whatever, and many of them have a lot of 12-step-like programs or things around them. And if you're being selective or saying, I'm looking to create this community for this type of person looking to get sober, I can see where that can be disruptive. I also think about the fact that for the most part, in any sobriety community, this is especially true in AA, there's not a lot of long-term success with the people who cycle in. There is long-term success with the people who stay.
Right.
But I see a lot of people who appear at meetings that don't stay or don't get sober.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I see is people who come into our meetings and they're really interested in the meeting. We've had this happen several times on Monday night over the last 6 months. People show up, and there was a guy, I'm not sure you were there that week. There was a guy who came in a little bit late, introduced himself. Oh, it was Memorial Day weekend, so I don't think you were there that day.
I didn't come.
Right. That was last week. Yeah.
The one on last week's show that I said I'm definitely going to and that I didn't go.
Right. No, you said you're definitely planning on going.
Yeah.
If I remember. But he came in and typically he works. So I talked to him afterwards, and I don't know I don't know what he had for sobriety. But typically he works during the day. So I gave him a meeting. I said there's a really good noon meeting up in Broadbrook, East Windsor, a town, not too far from us. And it's got really good sobriety. I've been to the meeting. Some really good guys go there, and it's a mixed meeting. So I told him it's a really, really good meeting. So if you're looking for a day meeting, if you can get to a Wednesday at noon, that's one you should try to get to. And he seemed to be appreciative. I don't know, right? I have no clue. Maybe I'll go there someday and bump into him. And that's all. But we see so many people cycle, like I said, cycle in. We give out big books to people all the time, to newcomers. Hey, if you need a big book, we'll give you one. We give out lots of big books. I'm going to tell you, most of the people we give out big books to don't come back. I'm
sure they're propping open doors so that
right.
They don't.
So it's just the way it is. We still give them out. We still buy them. We still give them out because we don't know. Because that's the whole point too, is right. We don't know, right? If you want to talk about our literature, our thing is we're not God, right? I mean, there's a book out there about AA called Not God. We're not God. So we can't tell somebody when they're going to get sober, when that message is going to get through. Like I said, there are people who take a long time to go through lots of relapses, and you hear that a lot. I came in here 20 years ago, and I was in and out for a while, and, finally they come in and they put together 5 or 6, 7 years. If you're turning them away, like, oh no, you can't come back, you've been relapsing too much, then, what do they do? Where do they go? How do they find their community? Like, we talk about it all the time. You got to find your community. So I'm pretty liberal with that. Again, not if they're disruptive. If they're disrupting a meeting, that's a whole different story. But I certainly, I'm one of the old timers now where I would grab somebody and pull them aside and say, hey, I've done it to people. I've done it to disruptive people in meetings. Pulled them aside, chewed their ass out. Like, hey, you're just not I have. I can remember one time, like, a couple guys, they were laughing and talking. I pulled them aside in the hallway. I'm like, what the fuck are you guys doing, man? You're being disrespectful to everybody who's talking. And I did it privately. I didn't call them out in the middle, but I'm not opposed to doing that if somebody's disrupting a meeting.
You can't be disruptive and you can't be laughing. That's worse than anything, because there might be other people who are a little shy, don't have a lot of self-confidence, and if they hear snickers in the background, that could be the end of them going to meetings. Absolutely.
I mean, it is something. Something. I was at a meeting a couple Fridays ago, my Friday night meeting, and I heard something. And I teased the guys, especially Friday night meeting. I might tease somebody, but I heard something that's going to change that for me. And it's just one of those things. Like I said, we never know what's going to click. And this guy said, I'm glad I have a place to go where I could dump all my stuff. He said, I don't want to have to bring my thick skin to my AA meeting. And I'm like, holy shit, am I making people bring by me needling people? Because I've done it a couple of times and then apologize. And they're like, oh, yeah, it's fine. But I started thinking, like, am I needling people and making fun of people, even though they're my friends? And they're like, am I making them have their thick skin at an AA meeting? I was like, I got to stop that behavior, right? So that's what happens. Like, that night I learned, like, oh, I got to stop that. Doesn't mean I won't do it again, but I'm going to tell you something. What I'll do is, if I do it again, I'll immediately realize, like, oh, and I'll fix it. But it's the same thing with the sobriety. It's like, who knows when you're going to get the message you need to get? I truly feel like I needed my relapse to come back and get the message I needed. Like, for me, that's what I needed. Not most people, a lot of people don't need a relapse. To me, it is what changed my whole program and my whole life. My relapse, and the problem I finally came to that realization was, man, I'm an alcoholic and I have no idea how to fix that. And that was a change for me. Like, that, from that day forward, I was like, I'm into this program 100%.
I've always been amazed at people's ability to relapse, because it was so hard for me to go to the first meeting.
Yeah.
I didn't want to get to know these people to begin with, and to go to these meetings, that's so painful. So the idea that you go through that pain and then you have to raise your hand and said you're relapsed, it's just easier to stay in for me, but I guess I was ready, and I was ready to do this long term. That's the difference.
Right. And again, you came in, you were ready for whatever reason, right? For whatever reason you came in, you were ready. It was the right time for you. And I'll tell you, you came in at the same time. I bet you came in around the same time I came in the first time. And you were ready and I wasn't. That's the difference. Like, I wasn't ready to fully commit to this program. Like, when you said I didn't want to get to know these guys, it wasn't so much I didn't want to get to know these guys, but I never have had anybody telling me what to do. Never, ever, ever. It's one of the things I've struggled with, right? And so I had a really hard time when people started telling me, oh, Steve, you need to do this, you need to do that. So I didn't do it, right? Because I wasn't ready to hear that. But and I think that's what you get with a lot of relapsers, right? Like, they don't want to hear that, so they go out and relapse. And I wasn't chronic. I just, I went out and I came back. But it was really, really difficult to me. So when people started calling me out, and this was happening, like, my behavior started to change a little bit. And there's one guy in particular I remember calling me out, and I I hate it. It was like, screw you, man. And I think that's what, for me, and again, it was me. So I don't need to put up with that. So I started distancing myself from that program. And lo and
I
behold, I drank again.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't call people out.
Yeah.
There are some things that I've experienced myself that I didn't much appreciate.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's how I would roll, but to each their own. I try to be how I approach people, I guess, is just a little bit different. I'm not that type of person to ream other alcoholics out, at least not today.
Yeah.
But I get it. Sometimes it's warranted. We had one of the meetings I went to, we actually had a bit of a business meeting because somebody came in, and we had a meeting around what do we do in those situations? What's our procedure?
Right.
We hashed out a procedure there. And I think that's helpful. If you've got a meeting and you don't know what the procedure is, ask the secretary, ask the treasurer, talk about it in your business meeting at the end of the month. It's worth having a plan because it might happen. There is that fine line between the disruptive and affecting other people in a negative way. And it is okay in those circumstances to say, you can't be here.
Right.
Something has to change. It's a fine line, but I think the chronic relapsers can also bring value. It's brought value to me that it makes me realize that it is an option, and it's not an option I want to have, and I don't want to feel like them.
It is an option, and that's the scary thing for us. That's the truth for those of us who feel that way. I know that's the truth for me. I've already done it. Like I said, one of the things you mentioned, like you came up with a process or a plan. The other thing, I can remember this guy coming in one time, and apparently I didn't know him, but apparently he had been there before. It was the Friday night meeting. It was the Friday night meeting before this meeting split, and this guy came in. He was very disruptive, and he was yelling and threatening people. And one of the things is like I remember, and it was like a little unnerving. It was a little unnerving, and one of the old timers got up and walked out, took this guy and walked outside with him. And I think somebody went out and followed so he wouldn't be alone out there with him. But that's the other thing that happens, especially, I don't know about women's meetings, but in mixed meetings or the meetings I go to, there's typically some really good sobriety. And those people with the good sobriety will stand up and many times handle something like that.
Right.
Not all the time. But yeah, you need a plan. You need to, but also, we talked about it. We need compassion. We are sick, suffering alcoholics, right? And that's the thing I think about when these people come in like that. If I see a person who's struggling, I really have a lot of empathy and compassion for them. I'm like, I really, there's a person who reached out to me. I don't know if I mentioned it, but it was a woman who reached out to me. She got my name from one of the churches where we used to have a meeting. And I talked to this woman almost every day. And she was looking for some help. She had like 3 years sober, and then she relapsed, and she came to the Monday night meeting the one time. But she's going through her stuff, right? And for the first couple of weeks I talked to her, she's like, she would always say, I slipped. And I would tell her, go to meetings, this and that, do what you got to do, find a community. Here's some women's meeting. You got to get yourself a sponsor. And then finally, she seems like, at least we only text message, right? We text each other. She seemed like she turned the corner.
Great.
She seems like she has. That's what she's saying. And I don't think she's a liar. I mean, I like, I get a feel like if she's going to slip, she's going to tell me she slips, or she's going to drink. But she seems like she's worked out some of that stuff. And I hope it's true. And that's the biggest thing. Like, I hope that these people are able to find sobriety, because I just know how much it changed my life.
Yeah, me too. I always hope somebody coming in is going to have sobriety. And as time has gone by, I'm always more pessimistic with new people because I've just seen the new people don't seem to stick. Yeah. There are people who come in who do. I'm not the last new person that's ever come in,
Right.
So I've seen those people come in, but more often than not, if I see a brand new face, it's almost like, well, I'm not going to commit their name to memory because
Yeah.
I'm probably never going to see this person
Yeah.
again. And that's terribly sad.
It is incredibly sad. But it's a nice thing is, again, we're not seeing it at the Monday night meeting, but I'm seeing it at my Friday night meeting where we have some guys. We've had 2 guys who have just gotten a year sobriety, right? And they've been
Mhm.
back at our meeting that whole time. They literally get up. We give out a few monthly coins. We don't give out every month. And it was nice to watch them. And both of these guys have embraced this meeting. And the other thing, they've embraced service. Like one of them's now the secretary, right? And the other one's the GSR. So they've embraced service. They take speaking commitments. Like these guys have bought into it, and they're young. They're like in their 30s. It's like it's so nice to have those people. Not only that, but it's also nice to think, all right, maybe this is the next generation who's going
Yes.
to continue to carry maybe this meeting, but certainly the message.
That's always good when you see those new people. And this is one of those things that if you are somebody who struggles with relapsing, volunteer for something, do a job. It is a great way to stay sober because you have to do something where you might be letting people down, or you take a job and you enjoy doing it. And these AA jobs, you don't even have to be great at it. Like if you're marginally competent,
Right.
that's all we're really looking for.
That's it. And I know a guy. I had a guy who I was working with for a couple of years during COVID, matter of fact, and he struggled. He was one of these people that we talk about, chronic relapser, and he was going to a meeting in the town next to us, in Vernon, town next to me, and he had the key to a meeting to the church, and an old timer gave it to him. Even though he knew, like he wasn't admitting, like he would go to his meeting, he wasn't admitting that he was relapsing, but this old timer knew, and this old timer said, "I think you need this key, right? Because that key made him go do the work, even though he was struggling. He would show up, he would open up the church, he would do the meeting. Some people would say, "Oh, that's bullshit. That's deceptive," but something." It helped him. He was trying.
Right.
And even with me, like he was, we would work for a while, and he had some family who lived, maybe an hour and a half from here. And every time he seemed to go back home, he seemed to relapse. And we talked about that. I'm like, sounds to me like every time you go back home, like, and he said, he said to me, like, you're the first person that ever picked up on that. And that was it. Like so when he would go home, I'm like, all right, call me before you get out. And he did. And it didn't matter. Like I would say, call me on your way. Like we'll talk a little bit. Nothing mattered. He would almost always relapse when he went home to visit family.
Don't go visit family.
That is what you need to do, right? That is, if you really want to get sober, you may have to do that, right?
Yes.
People do make those sacrifices. Like, oh, I can't go home because I'll relapse. He had an older mother, he had a mother, like there were some things, and I get it. So you have to, it's touchy. It's a tough one, but you do got to make that. You might have to make that decision, something, I can't go home or else I'm going to get drunk. And that's when you got to figure out, what's more important to you, staying sober or other stuff.
We don't say this enough. We do talk about this a little bit, that sobriety isn't necessarily just a luxury and a nice to have. Alcoholism kills. And the long-term prognosis for alcoholism is death if you don't fix it. Many times. Could be a drunk driving accident, or it could just be your liver fails, your heart fails.
Yep.
So sometimes you have to give up things like the family in the short term so you can be alive.
Yeah. I did. I know. I mean, I really, when I really came back this time, even the first time I did a little bit, not as much the first time. But the second time I came back, I was selective when I would see my family. And I've said it on here before. I have a brother who was, who's 5 years older, and he would have these pizza parties. And he would say, "Hey, Brian's coming over to, come on over, have some pizza." But I knew what they were, right? They were tequila drinking parties. And you had a little pizza on the side, right? So I didn't go to them. I loved them, right? Both of them. It was fun. But it wasn't for me anymore. So I stopped going to those. I mean, I had a sister who didn't drink, so I was able to see her and stuff like that. I absolutely changed who I went to see. I stopped going to a lot of things. I just wouldn't do certain things, and once I got enough sobriety, I was able to do some of them. I was able to go to more parties. I was able to go to more events with alcohol. I still wouldn't go to my brother's pizza dinner, whatever he wanted to call it, if there was because I know how those went. I wasn't going to go there to watch people drink tequila. Number one is because I loved drinking tequila, and it was like that's just like that's just too dangerous for me to go somewhere and watch people doing what I love to do.
Yep.
So I needed to just stay away.
I wouldn't be worried about drinking, but I don't like to be around people who are now overdoing it with booze. Yeah. I don't want to be in that situation anymore. It's just uncomfortable to me.
Yeah.
It's not fun.
I agree. No, that's what I mean. Usually if I go to something and there's a lot of drinking, like, you can put up with it for a couple of hours, and then all of a sudden you see like these are people are in it for the long haul.
Yep.
It's like, okay, now it's time to go. That's when you go, okay, it's time to go. See you guys. Mm-hmm. And I did that. I have some high school friends who I still go get together, and we were in Rhode Island, one of the guys' house last year, and we had talked about staying down there with a hotel, and we decided not to. But it's like some of the guys were sleeping over at the house. My wife didn't want to do that, and I could tell they started drinking. Man, it's like. And they drank well into the night. I saw the pictures on Facebook. They got up in the morning. They started drinking again. That's just not, and they know I don't drink. They know, so it just wasn't a place for me.
We'd love to hear from you with your experience, either with the chronic relapser or maybe you're the chronic relapser. What was that like? Were you treated with open arms? Were you chased away? Did you feel you were getting the message? What changed to change you from being a chronic relapser to somebody to have sobriety? If you never really relapsed like me, what did you get out of seeing the chronic relapser? You can reach out, Matt, at soberfriendspod.com. You can go to Instagram at soberfriendspod. I will respond to your direct messages. And something else I've been thinking of, I would love to have guests again. And I've been really too lazy to chase people down because I have a day job and I have responsibilities and stuff. And sometimes there's only so much I can balance all this stuff. And we've had some experts and other podcasters, but I really would love to have real people again because we've done that. And it's been a while since we've had just run of the mill people who can tell a sober story. So if you want to nominate something or nominate yourself, reach out. I'd love to do that to kind of change things up. Steve, here's to another week of sobriety.
Thanks, Matt.
And we'll see everybody next week. Bye, everybody. You made it this far into the podcast. That tells me you're a pretty big fan. If you like what we do and you find value in the podcast, consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/soberfriendspod. Your donation keeps us on the air to help out the new guy and helps us defray some of our costs. If you find value in our podcast, please consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/soberfriendspod.